Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday everybody. First up, we are discussing US-China relations, or to be more specific, US-China competition. The G20 was held over the weekend in India. Instead of going to the summit of leaders, Xi Jinping went to Heilongjiang in the northeast of the country for an inspection tour. On this tour, he held a meeting on the rejuvenation of the northeast of the country and inspected the 78th Group Army. He sent his number 2 man, Premier Li Qiang, in his place to the G20. Interestingly, Chinese state media reported on these meetings with leaders from Europe, but did not release an official report on his meeting with US President Biden, with the Foreign Ministry giving just a short readout on the Li-Biden meeting. Indeed, Li kept a fairly low profile at the gathering in India, holding just 5 bilateral meetings with leaders, including his one with Biden. In contrast, Xi Jinping met 11 heads of state at the G20 summit in Bali last year. It's unclear why this is the case. Perhaps the state media apparatus has been told not to give Li Qiang too much face, or as much face as his boss, and a meeting with the US leader in person before Xi would be giving a lot of face. What is also interesting is that there is no official readout from the US side on the meeting either. Perhaps Washington was asked or believes it should keep a low profile with the meeting, or perhaps the meeting simply was not very productive. At a press conference in Vietnam on Sunday, Biden confirmed that he had met with Li Qiang, saying, quote, "We're not looking to hurt China. We are better off if China does well by the international rules," end quote. He then commented on the poor state of the Chinese economy and what he thinks this means for regional tensions, expressing, quote, "I don't think it's going to cause China to invade Taiwan, and matter of fact, the opposite. It probably doesn't have the same capacity that it had before," end quote. We note that the following day on Monday, the chair of the US Congressional Committee on China disagreed with the president, saying that China's economic slowdown could increase the risk of Beijing taking military action toward Taiwan, expressing, quote, "I just think it's equally as plausible that as China confronts serious economic and demographic issues, Xi Jinping could get more risk accepting and could get less predictable and do something very stupid," end quote, adding, quote, "I think our best chance at deterrence is robust and smart investment in hard power," end quote. Why did Xi Jinping not go to India? Commentators have been debating this question for weeks now, with a common argument being that now that Xi has a reliable premier and is in his historic 3rd term, he can stay at home to manage domestic affairs and send Li overseas for major events, similar to the Mao Zedong-Zhou Enlai dynamics of the Mao era. However, several of Xi's biggest flagship policy agendas, like the Belt and Road Initiative and the Global Security Initiative, are globally focused. She has also signaled strong support for BRICS, so it seems unlikely that she will completely pull back from international trips. There are other theories too. He has domestic political pressure over the country's growing economic troubles. He is seen at home as having spent too much time abroad, or he wants to shift the focus to groupings more in line with Beijing's strategic direction, like the BRICS. However, the explanation for Xi not attending the G20 could be as simple as Beijing isn't very happy with India. Just hours before the group of 20 leaders met in New Delhi, prominent Chinese think tank, the China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations, which is run by the Ministry of State Security, China's top spy agency, published a strongly worded criticism of India, accusing the summit host of pushing its own agenda and causing disagreement. The commentary said that India had held 2 prior G20 sessions in disputed territories, one in Arunachal Pradesh, which China also claims, which has, quote, "sabotaged the atmosphere for cooperation at the G20," end quote, adding, quote, "India's actions, such as the selection of the G20's venue, agenda, and other aspects, have betrayed the small-mindedness of its grand scheme," end quote. As an aside, regular viewers know that this is the 2nd time in recent days that the Ministry of State Security, that is to say the intelligence establishment or intelligence elite, has published widely shared foreign policy statements, the last one being on US policy, which we covered in depth in Saturday's video. It would be interesting to know what the foreign policy establishment in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs feels about this. Despite Xi not being at the G20, Beijing still had a presence and influence. The wording of the G20 communiqué, for example, still reflected many Chinese talking points, such as that the G20 should limit itself to international economic issues, as well as the language on Ukraine, with the statement dropping reference to aggression against the country. UK-based Financial Times reports, citing two unnamed sources, that Chinese diplomats even called for the year's G20 summit declaration to delete a reference to the expected US presidency in 2026. However, several Western countries, including the UK, opposed the move, and the phrase was included in the final version adopted by the leaders over the weekend. Meanwhile, as we just mentioned, after the G20, US President Biden traveled to Hanoi, Vietnam, where the two sides announced that the Southeast Asian country will upgrade its relationship with the US to its highest level, matching that with China, that of the so-called Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. The symbolic but important designation follows years of lobbying by Washington, bringing the US to the same level as China, Russia, India, and, as of last year, South Korea. Vietnam has also been actively courting US economic and military cooperation, but long avoided the upgrade out of fear of upsetting China, with whom Vietnam shares a land border in the north, and with whom Vietnam was at war with in recent memory. This move then, the upgrade of relations, is significant. Quote, "This is more than words. In a system like Vietnam, this is a signal to their entire government, their entire bureaucracy, about the depth of cooperation and alignment with another country." End quote. The US will be seeking to leverage Vietnamese millennia-long concerns about China in its wider geopolitical game with Beijing in the Southeast Asian market and military competition in the South China Sea, with Vietnam being regarded as a frontline nation in the latter competition. Biden skipped the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and East Asia Summit in Jakarta before the G20 meeting in favor of the Vietnam trip, very much in a bid to show the importance America places on its relationship with Hanoi. However, some analysts argue that this development is just as much about Chinese strategic errors than American moves. Quote, "There's been some strategic self-harm by China. This is an unusual and significant step for Vietnam, and it is a sign of how strong Hanoi's desire is to counterbalance ties with China." End quote. Now we have two more quick US-China related developments to cover before we move on to the economy. First, US media is reporting that the US House panel on China, headed by Mike Gallagher, who we just quoted, will hold Taiwan war game exercises with Wall Street executives for the first time. The war game participants include representatives from investment banks, in addition to current and former executives from pharmaceutical companies and retired four-star US military officers. However, the financial executives have yet to be named. And second, yesterday, Monday, the Ministry of State Security used its WeChat account to discuss the case of John Long, who was sentenced to life imprisonment in May for spying for the United States. Long, who holds permanent residency in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and a US passport, was accused and convicted in a mainland court of being an informant for the CIA. Quote, "conducting spy activities for the US under the disguise of charity," end quote, in the words of state-run Global Times. The report from the Ministry of State Security says that Long's, quote, "spy career for the US spanned more than 30 years," end quote. This is the third post from the Ministry of State Security since early August discussing cases of alleged US spies. In the past, the top spy agency never published such reports. Quote, "This is a significant change in the way they talk about the US and espionage cases, probably related to both the revised counter-espionage law and the worsening evaluation of the state of US-China relations. now and far into the future. End quote. Next up, the Chinese economy. If you're enjoying today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing all helps for the channel. And for anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep China Update financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is a lot of work, but all your support are all incredible sources of motivation. So thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Yesterday, Monday, China's financial regulators and central bank delivered a strong verbal warning to speculators in defense of the yuan as the managed currency falls to a 16-year low. In the Monday readout on the so-called National Foreign Exchange Market Self-Discipline Mechanism, it expressed that regulators will, quote, take action when necessary, resolutely correct unilateral and pro-cyclical behaviors, firmly deal with behaviors that disrupt market order, and resolutely prevent the risk of exchange rate overshooting, end quote. One analyst expressed that in the dry language typical of these financial bureaucratic statements, quote, I don't think you will get a clearer warning that the regulators are about to try to inflict real pain on anyone betting against the RMB, end quote. With news of the statement, the onshore yuan jumped about 1%, the most since March, to around 7.27 per dollar, before slightly pairing gains. US outlet Bloomberg writes that, adding fuel to the yuan's rebound, China also reported Monday that credit expanded more than expected in August, adding that Beijing will hope the yuan's rebound will mark the start of a gradual return of confidence in Chinese assets, despite the fact that support measures to date have yet to have any sustained impact, and market confidence remains very poor. UK-based Reuters reports, citing 3 unnamed sources, that China's central bank is tightening its scrutiny of bulk dollar purchases by domestic firms due to mounting depreciation pressure. The sources told the outlet that companies that need to purchase $50 million or more will now need approval from the People's Bank of China, which convened a meeting with some commercial banks over the weekend to discuss this very matter. Despite the People's Bank of China's efforts to support the yuan, many strategists argue that the central bank will aim only to slow the pace of declines and is unlikely to do anything too drastic to reverse the weakening trend. Zhou Hao, chief economist at Guotai Junan in Hong Kong, observed in a note yesterday, quote, if the yuan continues to depreciate, the central bank will have to take more action, end quote. And one of the sources speaking to the above-mentioned Reuters team expressed, quote, the recent yuan depreciation has indeed been too severe, and many now expect the yuan to weaken beyond 7.5 per dollar, end quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a great Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.